How should NATO respond to incursions by Russian drones? How seriously is Europe rousing itself to face the threat from Vladimir Putin? And why is a Ukrainian defense company setting up shop to make missile propellants in Denmark?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are pleased today to be joined by Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Secretary General of the NATO alliance from 2009 to 14, as well as former Prime Minister of Denmark, now founding chairman of Rasmussen Global. Welcome, and let's start with your trip to the United States. You stopped by the Journal's office in New York a couple days ago. You're now calling in from Washington, D.C., where you've posted a photo of yourself with a visit with Senator Lindsey Graham. What is the message that you're bringing to the policymakers you're meeting there in D.C.?
Actually, I have two messages. First, I hope the United States appreciate that the Europeans are doing much more now when it comes to investment in defense, including support for Ukraine. And my second message is to achieve peace in Ukraine, we need to strengthen the pressure on Putin because Putin doesn't want peace. And the only way to change his calculus, the key to starting a peace process, is to force him to the negotiating table by telling him in clear terms, you cannot win on the battlefield. So better engage constructively in a peace process.
He still seems to be more interested at this point in testing NATO. These drone incursions reported in recent weeks, sightings over Poland, Romania. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in a speech yesterday, referred to these incidents as hybrid warfare, a targeted gray zone campaign against Europe, and suggesting that this was calculated to linger in the twilight of deniability, unquote. What do you think that Putin is doing, and how forcefully should NATO, in your view, respond to these?
I believe NATO should respond much more forcefully because what we're seeing now is Putin testing our resolve. He's testing the threshold of invoking Article 5. To that end, he's trying to circumvent Article 5 by incursions into our airspace to see how we react and if we react. And I think we should deter Putin from doing that testing. And to that end, we need a more determined response, including a public declaration that we want to shoot down aircrafts that violate our airspace, and we want to intercept and eventually eliminate drones that violate our airspace. That's the best way to deter Putin.
Does that public declaration, in your view, include potentially manned aircraft? Also, reports in recent weeks of manned MiG-31 Russian fighter jets in Estonian airspace over the Gulf of Finland. Russia denies that these were in Estonian airspace. What do you say to those who think that Putin would love nothing more than for NATO to down a Russian jet in NATO airspace? It would allow him to go to his domestic audience and say, look, NATO is the aggressor.
The fact is, Putin, so far at least, Putin has respected Article 5. He knows that NATO allies are determined to defend every inch of NATO territory, which I think we should make clear also includes our airspace. So the thing is this, if we declare publicly in advance that aircrafts, even manned aircrafts and drones, will be shut down if they violate our airspace, then I'm sure Putin wouldn't violate our airspace. We should call his bluff and not give in to threats.
So it's the ambiguity here, in your view, that is provocative. Maybe would be one way to put it.
Yes, ambiguity invites to testing our resolve. Clearness in our statements acts as a deterrent. And that's why I think we should make a public statement in line with what the Polish Prime Minister Tusk has already done, that all aircrafts and drones that violate our airspace will be shut down.
Part of the difficulty with these drones is the asymmetry of it. NATO has scrambled F-35 fighter jets, for example, in response to drones over Poland. That's a very expensive proposition. And then when some of these drones get downed, we find out that they're made of foam and plywood and very cheap materials. Some of them are decoy drones. So there's now been some talk in Europe about setting up a drone wall. Do you have a sense of what that kind of a drone defense capability would look like, and how fast it can be put into place?
You're quite right. The asymmetry in shooting down cheap drones with expensive military equipment, including F-35s, that's not an efficient way of dealing with incursions into our airspace. And that's why discussions have started to establish a so-called drone wall, which obviously is not a physical wall, but it's a network of sensors, radars, jamming systems that can detect, track, and eliminate drones. How long would that take? Yeah, it's been discussed. It's been mentioned that it would take 1 to 2 years to establish a drone war. That's far too long. Speed is of the essence. And the fact is, a number of producers of those capabilities, high-end technical capabilities, a number of those producers have told us in Rasmussen Global that they do have the capacity and the facilities to deliver those capabilities much, much earlier. So we're working on creating a so-called drone coalition that can develop a package, bind all those capacities together thanks to artificial intelligence, and present that package to interested states in order to establish such a drone wall within a few months. Let me also remind you that on a daily basis, already today, the Ukrainians are fighting against the Russians. They are countering those drone incursions. So a drone wall exists already. You have the expertise available already in Ukraine. So 1 to 2 years, that's much too long.
What is your perspective on the prospects for a favorable end to the Ukraine war? I mean, does it seem like the president of the United States is running out of patience? The last time I think that I heard from him on this subject, it was 2 weeks. It seems like we're always 2 weeks away from amping up some kind of additional pressure on Putin.
Yeah. I think the prospects of an end to this war is pretty much up to us in the West. As I said, Putin has no incentive to engage in a peace process as long as he believes that he can win on the battlefield. So we have to change this calculus. And I have actually been encouraged by my talks in DC yesterday and today. Among others, I met with Senator Lindsey Graham, who has presented a bill, a bipartisan bill, by the way, according to which President Trump, will be authorized to impose high tariffs on China and India unless they put pressure on Russia to stop the fighting in Ukraine. Hopefully, that will be followed by similar decisions by the Europeans. So that's an increased economic pressure. In addition to that, we need to strengthen the military pressure by delivering long-range weapons and missiles to Ukraine, including the American Tomahawks, without any restrictions, so that the Ukrainians can hit targets on Russian soil. If we increase pressure on Putin, then he will hopefully realize that he has no chance to win this war on the battlefield, so it's much better to engage in a peace process.
You've also called for a reassurance force, as you call it, of willing nations, European nations, to put some boots on the ground in Ukraine, but not on the front lines. What do you imagine that would look like? And where would those forces be stationed? How far back from the front lines? I mean, is the idea to put them around Lviv somewhere or around Kyiv to make clear to Putin that he will not be allowed to overrun the Ukrainian capital and take all of the country, or even closer to the front line than that, perhaps?
Yes. For some months, some European countries have been creating a coalition of the willing countries that are capable and willing to do what it takes to eventually deploy a reassurance force in Ukraine. I don't think such a European reassurance force should be deployed on the front line. So the frontline fighting against the Russians will still be the task for the Ukrainians. But it could be deployed to protect, as you mentioned, Kiev, Lviv in the west, other big population centers and critical infrastructure behind the Ukrainian lines. It's a military decision how far from the front line it's most efficient to deploy such a European reassurance force. Now, we lack some progress in the deliberations on deployment of such a reassurance force. Until now, 26 countries have pledged to be willing to contribute, but it has not seen the progress I wanted, and there are two reasons for that. Firstly, many countries demand a peace agreement before they want to deploy their troops on Ukrainian soil. And secondly, they also request a declaration from the US that the United States will back up and support such a reassurance force. For these reasons, final decisions haven't been taken yet. I hope that will happen in the very near future.
But on the first of those, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but is your argument that putting that kind of force in would be what would help lead to a ceasefire? And on the second, if those European capitals are waiting for the United States to take a strong stance on that, is there a point at which their patience runs out and they decide that they are going to take that step even without that kind of a statement from the White House?
Yeah. On the first argument about peace agreement as a precondition for the deployment of reassurance force, I think it's a fundamental mistake to make a deployment dependent on a peace agreement, because de facto that would hand over a veto right to President Putin. He will get an incentive to continue the war to avoid the deployment of a reassurance force. So in my opinion, we should take that decision and deploy a reassurance force, even if there is no peace agreement. Actually, I do believe that if we take that step, it would rather facilitate the start of peace negotiations. Now, on the second argument about an American support for this reassurance force, I would like to make clear we do not expect the deployment of American troops on the ground. So the bulk of the work will be done by Europeans. But it would be it would strengthen the deterrent effect if the United States would declare, if Russia attacks the European reassurance force, then the United States would consider that a threat to also American security. Actually, that would be pretty close to the security guarantee that the United States has issued recently in favor of Qatar. Qatar got such security guarantees from the United States. I think that could be the blueprint for similar security guarantees for Ukraine. Ukraine is a democracy. Ukraine is fighting against an aggressor, fighting for freedom, democracy, and territorial integrity.
More broadly, have European capitals sufficiently woken up, in your view, to the threat being posed here by Russia, and particularly the erosion of the European defense and industrial base? NATO, of course, is now raising its target for spending to 5% of GDP. But you said this in a recent interview. Russian defense investment is now bigger than the combined defense investment in the rest of Europe. Unquote, which I think might come as a surprise to some listeners, particularly given the broader, economic weight, the comparison between the Russian economy and GDP versus Europe's.
Yeah, it is stunning. But the fact is, Russia has rearmed heavily during recent years. Now, the latest estimate is that the Russian defense investment is equivalent to 7% of the Russian GDP. And in average in Europe, though it has risen in recent years, it's still between 2 and 3%. So despite the fact that the Russian economy isn't bigger than maybe Italy's economy, Russia can still act as a regional threat towards security on the European continent. You ask me if the Europeans have woken up to that reality. Well, yes, I would say yes, but too late and too slowly. But many European countries have increased their defense investment significantly in recent years. For instance, Poland is pretty close to investing already now 5% of their GDP in defense. And the three Baltic states are all above 3%, approaching 4%. And many other European countries are following suit. So, yes, Europe has discovered the reality. Putin's attack against Ukraine was a wake-up call. And I have to add, so was the election of President Trump. President Trump has used harsh rhetorics to press the Europeans to invest more, and he succeeded. I mean, at the NATO summit in The Hague earlier this year, a decision was taken to set a new goal of investing at least 5% of GDP in defense. I appreciate that. It was high time.
Let me ask you also about Denmark's decision to welcome Ukrainian defense companies, including one called Firepoint, that is planning soon to start making solid rocket propellant in the south of the country for its new domestically designed Flamingo missile. What is the idea there? I mean, is it to create kind of a new defense industrial hub in Denmark?
The main idea is to protect the Ukrainian defense production against the Russian attacks. So that's why it has been moved to Denmark to take place under more secure circumstances. But I do believe that in addition to that, we will also see a positive spin-off for the Danish defense industry, because the cooperation with Ukrainian defense companies will also allow us to take advantage of the latest Ukrainian experience. The Ukrainians are actually really competitive when it comes to innovation and also work determination, I would say. So the whole European defense industry could actually profit from a closer cooperation with the Ukrainian defense industry. Denmark has already introduced what has been called the Danish model, according to which we are investing directly in Ukrainian defense companies located in Ukraine, because we get more value for money by investing the money directly in Ukraine. And they are producing much faster and much more efficiently than many European defense companies. So that's the Danish model 1.0. And now we have lifted it to a new level, the Danish model 2.0, to locate certain Ukrainian defense production in Denmark to be protected against Russian attacks.
And what about expertise flowing? Are the Ukrainian forces, as the Ukrainian military and intelligence, are they sharing with NATO the lessons that they are learning about this new mode of drone warfare, as we've seen on both sides, but the iterations of drone technologies on the Ukrainian side and the Russian side? Are those lessons being shared about what these Russian capabilities are, how they're changing?
Yes, indeed. And a very concrete and recent example is a summit that the European Union organized in Copenhagen some days ago. And the Russians had already violated our airspace with drone incursions a few days before that summit. So the Ukrainians offered their expertise to help the Danish military to detect drones and protect the Danish airspace against incursions from Russia. It's an excellent example that despite the pressure on the Ukrainian military because of the war, Ukraine can actually become an asset within NATO.
One final question here on energy. I know you've called for Europe to wean itself off of Russian energy, but another thing that might come to as a surprise to listeners is the share that is still sourced from an adversary. This is recently from the European Commission earlier this year. It says the EU has dropped its share of Russian gas imports from 45% to 19%. And yet almost 1/5. What is the holdup there, and how can Europe get that down even further?
Yeah, that's an important point. First, of course, we should appreciate the reduced dependency on imported Russian oil and gas. But Europe is still importing too much. So the European Commission has now decided to accelerate cutting down the imports of the rest of Russian oil and gas, and individual countries have done the same, because we have seen too many members of the European Union import liquefied natural gas from Russia. We have to stop that. President Trump has made that point. I fully agree, and I hope to see Europe completely independent from importing Russian oil and gas. We cannot continue a traffic where indirectly we are financing the war in Ukraine. We have to stop that.
Thank you, Honors Fogh Rasmussen. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.